customary for me to ask you, what stood out as you read those passages from Bill's letter? What had the most meaning for you in your life right now?
That's a great question. Well, I am doing Herb K's workshop this year for the first time. And I'm noticing that, embarrassingly enough, that my disturbance is the same as this is talking about unhealthy dependency and its consequences and unhealthy demands. So I've been doing a lot of writing, and what I've recognized, and this is embarrassing as well, is that underneath my insecurity was I'm either superior or inferior, not in between. And so I'm recognizing that and hoping by smashing that idea with God's help, because I can't do it myself,
Yeah.
that I could be shoulder to shoulder, a person among people, a worker among workers, and a friend among friends. That's my hope. So that's all I really have. And I want what you have. I've been to your workshop. I want what Herb has. I want to be present and emotionally sober, not just, I want to wake up. So it's a slow process, but I'm really with pain and joy, both being present and off and on through this work. I'm feeling a new sense of hope.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful, guy. It's so funny when you say, I want what you have. Sometimes, what do I have? I mean, you have to remind me because it changes moment to moment some days, Lisa. It's something that is definitely a process that at moments when I'm able to achieve that, I celebrate, but I really have let go of the expectation that somehow I'm going to set up residence there. I will visit. It's kind of like going to a nice hotel, right? I get to check in for a few days and then sometimes I leave and come back, but that's been my experience. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, I'm very, very excited. I've been looking forward to this next phase of this workshop, which is to really take a deep, deep dive into the 12 steps as written in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions by Bill Wilson, because this is where Bill really started to bring together, to coalesce his ideas about emotional sobriety. In fact, we will see when we get to step 12 is that what he said in the last paragraph of the first paragraph discussing step 12 is that if we practice these principles in our daily life, that we and those about us may find emotional sobriety. See, we talk about this as the best kept secret in the rooms. Very few people understand that the goal, the expressed goal, the explicit goal that Bill Wilson discusses is that we will achieve emotional sobriety as a result of working the steps. Well, that's a remarkable thing in terms of the achievement of emotional sobriety. And we've been talking about what that is. And for those of you that are new to the workshop today, I'll just give a very, very brief description of it. Is emotional sobriety can be understood as freedom, as the development of a consciousness of freedom. Well, in order to do that, we have to let go of the consciousness that says, I'm okay if. A consciousness that is dependent or contingent upon things being a certain way for us to be okay. Now, a lot of times that belief is an unconscious belief that drives our behavior. It's only when we start to wake up, as Lisa was discussing a minute ago, and as we're going to start to see in step one, because step one is about an awakening. As we wake up, we start to look at things in a very, very different way. So in one way, what we're looking at is that to develop a consciousness of emotional freedom, our consciousness needs to change step by step. And one way of looking at the steps is to say, how is our consciousness changing? What are the characteristics of that change that's taking place within us that's going to lead us to a consciousness that says, I'm okay even if things don't go my way. I can get to a place where I can be okay regardless of what's going on. See, that's the ultimate experience of emotional freedom. Bill talks about it as regardless of success or failure, regardless of sickness or health, regardless of disappointment or things going our way. He says if we develop this emotional sobriety, it's like we develop and this is once again an idealistic way of saying it, but in one sense, we become unshakable. Now, it doesn't mean that from time to time that you're going to be knocked off balance. We all are. And those times, those are important because every time you're knocked off balance is another opportunity to take a look at how this emotional dependence is rooted so deeply inside of our unconscious. And when we discover this later on, because a lot of you that are just new to the program are going to see things pretty quick. Oh my God, I see that. I'm reacting this way. There's an expectation I have. That's going to, the low-hanging fruit, we're going to be able to pick real quick. But the stuff that's deep and in your unconscious is going to come later. And if you continue to do this work, you will be amazed at how deeply our dependence runs. How deeply this idea I'm okay if runs, and how our dependence on we attach that to all kinds of things and experiences in our life. So that's what this workshop is about, the exploration of emotional sobriety, the achievement of a much more complex state of consciousness. Let me just say something about that real quick. All human development, in fact, all organisms that develop on our planet, go from a simple state to a more complex state. That more complex state becomes the new baseline. And that becomes now the simple state that then moves to a more complex state. Now you're going to see the steps follow that same arc of development. That each step is moving us from one state of consciousness to a different state of consciousness. That's all leading to a consciousness of emotional freedom. The other thing you're going to see as we go through the steps, that they achieve this by developing a certain kind of an emotional charge. Step one creates an incredibly powerful emotional charge, as we're going to be talking about here in a minute. That charge, that energy, that tension, when you feel tension, you want that to be resolved. In fact, we are wired to move towards completion. We're wired to resolve that tension so that we reach a new state of equilibrium. Well, once that state is resolved in step two, after we take step one thoroughly, and now step two resolves that crisis that occurs in step one, it creates a new tension that needs to be resolved and then propels us towards step three. That process, moving from tension to resolution, a new tension, the creation of a new tension to a new resolution, carries us through all of the steps until step 12. The design of this is remarkable. It's truly God-given. It's divine, as people describe it. Bill has captured something here that's creates an unbelievably powerful transformation and takes us from a state of being where we are emotionally dependent to helping us grow up and learn how to stand on our own two emotional feet. Boy, I've needed that my whole life, and I'm sure those of you that are out there listening to us discuss this tonight also can recognize how important it is in your life. So without further ado, I'm going to read to you a little bit from step one. I'm probably only going to do a couple pages because there's such a wealth of stuff to look at here. And then I'm going to invite Herb and Julia and Tom in to make some comments about some of the things that I'm going to be discussing as I go through on page by page, step one. So, step one, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Bill starts this section out by saying, who cares to admit complete defeat? Practically no one, of course. Every natural instinct cries out against the idea of personal powerlessness. Well, I want you to think about what Bill is talking about here. He calls it every natural instinct. Well, really, it's the reaction that our false self is having to facing a limitation. You see, no one develops a false self that has in its components, in its makeup, the recognition of limitations. The false self, by definition, is an idealized version of who we should be. So when we create it, it's an absolute thing. We develop that false self because we believe if we become that person that we think we should be, then life is going to work. Everything will be fine. In fact, Dr. Karen Horney calls the search for that idealized self the search for glory. That if I am able to take these ideas I have and somehow, shape myself into that ideal, then life is going to work. I will be happy all the time. I will feel great all the time. My relationships will be wonderful. Things will always go my way. See, that's the idea, the illusion that we are pursuing when we develop that false self. So the first part of Bill's discussion of step one is to really get us in touch with the structure that we've created in our personality that is based on a dedication to actualizing a concept of who we should be. That concept is threatened when we admit complete defeat. Because essentially what we're saying is that the way that I've been living, this idealized image I have, isn't going to work. It's like trying to take a life preserver out of the hands of a drowning victim. Bill even makes reference to that later on in this chapter. You see, that false self was developed to resolve our basic anxiety. And that basic anxiety we have is an anxiety that we're not going to be loved, we're not going to be accepted or acceptable, and we're not going to belong. That's an incredible threat to our existence. If I'm not accepted, if I don't belong, if I'm not loved, then I'm nothing. The existential anxiety that creates drives us to search for this glory, to search for some solution to this basic anxiety so that I can find a way to ensure my existence to whatever degree I can, given what's available for me in my family, in my culture, etc., etc. And the only thing that's available in our culture is a false self, unfortunately. Dr. Murray Bowen calls it the pseudo-self. That's what we use to adapt to that pressure that the anxiety is creating inside of us. He goes on to say, it is truly awful to admit. And then he goes on to talk about alcoholism. That glass in hand, we have warped our minds into such obsession for destructive drinking, and only an act of providence can remove it from us. See, he's talking about here that something has to happen in our life that wakes us up and says, this isn't working. That what I'm doing is going to continue to cause misery, destruction, suffering in my life. It's a call to waking up from our trance, from waking up from the idea that somehow what I'm doing is going to result in living a good and happy and successful life. Goes on and later on talks about humiliation. He says, we perceive that only through utter defeat we are able to take our first steps towards liberation and strength. You see, he's already indicating to us that where we're leading towards is a whole new strength in our life, a foundation that's based on something very different from the idea that we have to control everything to be okay. See, that when we liberate ourselves from this consciousness that says, I'm okay if, we start to move towards having a real strength in life, a strength that is based on being able to deal with life on life's terms, to being able to have an appropriate and honest relationship with reality. Nathaniel Branden calls that self-confidence, self-efficacy. It's an important component of self-esteem. If everything has to be the way I want it, there's no way I can have any confidence in my ability to deal with things, because I get mad when situations don't happen. I object to those things. I don't get on busy with the work of learning how to cope with what's going on in reality. I end up objecting and trying to blame myself or someone else about what's happening. Well, that just keeps me stuck and immature. Fritz Perls calls it a sick point, a stuck point in our life. He goes on to say, our admission of personal powerlessness finally turned out to be the firm bedrock upon which happy and purposeful lives may be built. So what we're seeing here is that it's the opposite of what our false self says. Being able to admit my limitation and face it opens a door to freedom from that limitation. See, Bill is introducing us to the fact that paradox is what creates change. He is describing the paradoxical theory of change that we talk about in Gestalt therapy all the time. That change occurs when a person owns what one is doing, accepts what one is doing, rather than tries to be someone or something that they're not. And that's what Bill captures here so clearly. Our admission of personal powerless finally turns out to be the firm bedrock upon which happy and purposeful living can be built. He goes that we know that little good can come to any alcoholic who joins AA unless he has first accepted his devastating weakness and all its consequences. Until he so humbles himself, his sobriety, if any, will be precarious. Of real happiness, he will find none at all. Proved beyond doubt by an immense experience, this is one of the facts of AA life. The principle that we shall find no enduring strength until we first admit complete defeat is the main taproot from which our whole society has sprung and flowered. So you see that what we're also getting introduced here is the importance of self-confrontation. Bill is introducing us to the idea that we have to confront ourselves and see who we are, not who we think we are. We have to face the reality of our condition, the reality of our behavior, how we're really and actually functioning in life, and not staying tied to some fantasy about what's going on or a justification of why we're doing what we're doing. We do what we do because of who we are and because of our false self and our reliance on that idea of who we have to be and what we need to do. And it makes sense for me when I look back at my drinking, it was to experience a sense of personal freedom. It was the only time I felt okay being myself. So my dependence on alcohol was an example of what Bill calls a wrong dependency. It was a specific example of my emotional dependence on what we call environmental support, that my environment would help me be who I am rather than me finding a way to be okay with who I am, regardless of what's going on around me. He says, when first challenged to admit defeat, most of us revolted. Of course we did. This is the importance of seeing our resistance to change. Our resistance doesn't mean that there's something wrong. It reflects our adaptation and our reliance on a solution that's no longer viable for us. And letting it go comes from the fact that I don't have faith that I've got any other possibility within me. See, a lack of my faith is my dilemma. Lack of my faith to be able to grow into what I can be. You see, I've lost touch with myself so much that I think I have to hold on to this because it's the only possibility. We had approached AA expecting to be taught self-confidence. Then we had been told that so far as alcohol is concerned, self-confidence was no good whatever. In fact, it was a total liability. There's no such thing as the personal conquest of this compulsion by the unaided will. So what he is saying to us, he's talking specifically about some of the characteristics of what a physical dependence and a mental obsession of alcohol is about. But what he's also telling us, and this is very important, what he's also telling us that the consciousness that is creating the problem cannot solve it. It's the same thing that Gurdjieff was saying. We have to wake up and realize that we have been asleep, dreaming we are awake. And Gurdjieff goes on to saying that what put us in that trance cannot wake us up. We need new experiences, new information, and we need a level of getting honest with ourselves like we've never had before. In fact, being honest with yourself is not a part of anybody's false self and a characteristic that would define a false self. Oh yeah, we can be honest about other people and what they're doing, but not about ourselves. We can look at other people and see their shortcomings, but it's very hard to see our own. So I think I'll leave it with that part. There's another little section at the bottom of that. Let me invite Herb and Tom and Julia into the room with me and let them share some of their thoughts about this step. And we will continue step one again, finishing up that chapter next week. Herb, good evening. I think you're muted right now. There we go. Julia, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Tom, Potash. Well, Herb, I will ask you to kick off your comments, and then Julia, and then Tom.
Well, thank you, Dr. Berger, Alan, my good friend. I've again made a list of notes, and we'll spend some time on this, so I don't have to unpack all my thoughts and experience at once here. I'll do a little bit just to amplify what you'd said. And right at the beginning, I think it's really important. It was for me to get a full understanding of step one, which allowed me to go beyond the big book structure. Because in the big book structure, he treats step one up through page 43, and he only talks about addiction. And yet step one has that key that you mentioned, unmanageability. And unmanageability is actually the source of emotional immaturity, emotional mischief, if you will. And understanding that and treating that is the outcome we're looking for, which is emotional maturity, emotional sobriety, treating unmanageability, not treating addiction. More of that as we probably progress. Now, I did not know any of what I just said in my first 10 years of sobriety. I got a real clear picture of addiction, and I was surprised when I read step one in the big book, in the 12 and 12, to see that Bill actually really doesn't address unmanageability in that step. And yet the 12 and 12 is replete with the words emotional sobriety, and Bill understood it. It's clear in the big book that he understood and could articulate what it was, although he didn't have the words emotional sobriety, he had the concept and the understanding of the actual nature of it. And he wrote it in chapter 4 and he wrote it in chapter 5 of the big book. But Alan, you said, and this is where I'm going with this, you'd said something so important for us here as we start again, a new project. We're starting a new project, a new study, a completely new set of concepts and vocabulary and purpose. And that is looking at the steps in the 12 and 12 from the vantage point of emotional sobriety. Bill's 20 years sober. What did he know? What did he say? What did he see that was different from the big book that we can relate to today in terms of emotional sobriety? And right off the bat, this man at 10 years of sobriety for me, I'd had an experience with addiction, the drama, when I first came in. I had an experience with addiction the first time I went through the steps, the allergy and the craving. I had an experience and understanding of addiction the second time I went through the big book, obsession and compulsion. Got it down cold. I understood it. I had new experiences with it. It was fabulous. But I still, at 10 years of sobriety, had no clue. And I had no clue that I had no clue about unmanageability. And the first thing he did, this man, he said, you have a lot of information, but you have not had a sufficient understanding and transformation. So embrace a set-aside attitude. And he quoted from the big book, page 58. And I'm reinforcing, Alan, what you were talking about there. And it says, some of us have tried, quoting Gurdjieff and Einstein, some of us have tried, page 58, how it works. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go. Absolutely. I'm pleading with you. Seriously. No, right now, here, to you, every individual on this, including Dr. Berger and Tom and Julia. Each one of us, myself, embrace an attitude of, I'm coming here with some information and some experience and some knowledge, some opinions. To the extent that I hold on to all of that, I'm going to be prevented from any new information and experience and knowledge and opinions. To the extent that I am fettered by up till now, I won't be taken into a new experience. Some form of set-aside attitude about having an open heart, having an open mind, and being willing to be given it. Nothing I can do can precipitate it. I believe in grace. I believe in power. I believe in a power in the universe that's immaterial and spiritual, and I know nothing about it. It's a mystery. But I know from looking back over my shoulder that there's an X plus factor that's at work, because I couldn't be here to the extent that I am here without that. I'm smart. I'm organized. I'm disciplined. I take direction. I have a lot of willingness. But what I have today is way beyond the combination of the sum of all those parts. And I believe it's because of that X plus factor. I can't explain it. I can't earn it, but I can observe it. So that we can approach this process now, listening to everybody's knowledge and experience and efforts at communicating them, and be delivered to a new experience of unmanageability. That Bill said it and Alan quoted it. Bill said the hopelessness here. Oh, the taproot. The taproot is the hopelessness of complete defeat. And adding to what Alan mentioned, that in the ABCs on page 60, the B, no human power. Not Alan, not anybody on this, not your sponsor, not the 12 steps, not the big book, not your meetings, not your own capacities for learning and experiencing. No human power. And open our minds and our hearts up to that as we process this with with the hope of and expectation of a new experience. I'm going to leave it at that.
All right, Julia, you want
Sure. Yeah. And I will say, that in terms of that hotel room that we talked about, that is emotional sobriety, I think I have gazed maybe through the windows from the outside. I'm not even sure I've been in the lobby. And I am still in my first 10 years. So I don't claim to have as much wisdom or experience, but I'm grateful to be part of this. And I do come with hopefully an open mind and an open heart. I think so. But what really struck me in the 12 and 12 this time was in the first part in the table of contents where they have a little blurb about each step. And it said, admission of powerlessness is the first step in liberation. And I think that talks and it continues to talk about emotional sobriety, because it's not just about alcohol, right? And ultimately, I think this step is fundamentally about breaking through denial and embracing reality as it is, not the way we want it to be. And it's not just about stopping drinking. It's about developing, like you said, I think, Alan, a perspective, a new way of living, and one that aligns with reality. And living that way requires the principles of emotional sobriety, I think, if I hope to have any happiness or peace. Yeah, when I was in my addiction, and for me it was alcohol, but whatever the compulsive behavior is, there was minimizing the consequences, blaming, rationalizing, and when I really took step one, it forced like an acknowledgement of that denial and the truth, which was terrifying. Like you talked about, Alan, I never thought of it as having like this false self. But I felt like a drowning person with my life vest being ripped away. And that allowed me to see, more of the chaos in my life and the emotional sobriety, and allowed me to see that, I thought I was controlling my drinking and my alcohol was controlling me. And there are still places in my life, where I can look and I'm like, where do I think I'm controlling stuff? And like the way I'm often unconsciously thinking, believing what habits are still keeping me trapped. Yeah, and I think admitting that and being honest, and breaking that denial, which is also not always up to me. I have to be open to it. And it comes when it comes. But that's where that shift happens. And when I was going through this book, and I pulled it out, this is an older copy. I also ran across a book that I got like the first couple years I was sober, which is Staying Sober. I think it's pretty old, Terrence Skorsky and Merlene Miller. And he talks a lot about relapse, and the consequences of not drinking. We talk about how, or drinking or whatever the behavior is, being in an addiction that we're controlled by. And what that looks like. And I think step one also opened my mind to that. It's not just that I'm really, really sick from drinking. It's I don't know how to live without this compulsion. And I need some other help. And it took things getting really bad until I was willing to do that because it was too scary. And yeah.
Tom?
Hey, everybody. what I find interesting about step one in the 12 and 12, it's the shortest chapter. It's only 4 pages. And I assume it's because uh, he had covered, powerlessness and the step one concept so so detailed and such depth in the big book that maybe it didn't need as much coverage as uh, in the 12 and 12. But everything else it builds off of it, right? The rest of the steps and the rest of the chapters and the details in which they go into and the layers that get peeled back in each of these is really impressive. What I picked up on tonight, and it's funny that I think you hit on it as well, was you talked about the false self, right? And how step one in relation to coming to realize the false self is there and needing to start to work beyond it. As I reread this today, a couple things kept coming up, right? The word humility and humbles, right? Talks about needing to humble ourselves for our sobriety. And there was somewhere else. The adoption of attitudes and actions which would create a transformation. So again, it's a shift, it's a change that will lead to, ongoing sobriety and then emotional sobriety. But what I picked up on was like admitting complete defeat towards my delusions, right? My false self, um, my fight against reality, what it comes down to, right? So like in he talks about the part about going out and trying some cold controlled drinking, you know, for my emotional dependence, it was like try to do some controlled relationship with reality and see how I can handle that. And can I manage, to do just a little bit of reality and report back and see if I'm ready to accept it or not, or am I going to go back into my delusion? Um, the reality is that this work has been progressive. I can fault myself for not seeing this at this point in my recovery or that point in my recovery. And some of this came up in the earlier workshop, the small group we have before this about, um, how we still, how I still behave as like an adolescent, right? At times. But this is the capacity I have right now. This is the awakening, the consciousness that I have right now. And the best I could do is, you know, admit that I'm not right all the time, that I'm not grounded in reality all the time, and that leads to the potential of what's next. And that's the good news is if I can humble myself and to admit complete defeat against reality and start to accept it as it presents itself, then I've got a starting point towards this emotional sobriety recovery journey.
One of the things I'd like to say, in addition, thanks everybody for your sharing. Just to, I do believe Bill suggests, without maybe consciously, but he suggests what is the purpose, his definition of emotional sobriety. He talks about a happy, useful, purposeful life in
Yeah.
that chapter. And yeah, please read the forward. Juliet indicated that's got some information in it also. But then I really encourage people to use, because I don't believe he addresses unmanageability in the 12 and 12 in step one, but he does, not structurally, but in content, he includes it in the big book. So if you have a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you don't get one, on page 45, he transitions from the body and the mind to the will. It says lack of power is our dilemma. And then on page 52, the second paragraph describes the behavior that comes out of unmanageability. What does it look like? page 52. Take a look at that bedevilment paragraph and look up the word bedevilment. Because I think that's a wonderful behavioral description of what it looks like without addiction. I'm not talking about addiction and behavior that comes from our addiction. I'm talking about 1 year sober, 10 years sober, 20 years sober. How is this bedevilment paragraph applicable to me? And then take a look at pages 60 to 62 and read that as the description of the cause of those bedevilments or the underlying source of, which Bill says is our self-centeredness, which Dr. Berger talked about in current language as our false self. And I think that information, Bill had it, but even, and I was so surprised as I read today, step 1, that even though he had the information, he had it, from my standpoint, exactly right in the big book in 1939, he did not structurally include it in his commentary at all. He mentions the word unmanageable, but he doesn't give us any grist for the mill, no description of it, and he really knew it from I think from a wonderfully articulate way. But in some way, maybe he hadn't still experienced it, although he began to have the results of 20 years of sobriety. So he was able to use the phrase emotional sobriety and try to encourage people to think of it as the new frontier.
Yeah, it's that the unmanageability was so focused on the experience with alcohol.
Correct.
Right. He talked about it, and that's really was such a strong emphasis
Correct.
in the 12 and 12. And you're right, he talks about all kinds of emotional unmanageability. He talks about we're the actor thinking we're the director. I mean, later on, he describes it so well. And it is surprising that it shows up later on, and as we're going to see, but that he did not include that was also something I was very aware of, Herb, in terms of what you're saying. Very aware of that it was not captured in that way. He spent so much time focusing on our relationship to alcohol, which is okay. I mean, that's, we can think of that as a metaphor for everything else. I mean, just take out the word alcohol. It's a metaphor for our relationship to dependency and what dependency does, right? It takes over, it controls you. The dependency becomes the determining force in your life. It is the Mr. Hyde that's controlling our action and behavior.
I'm addicted to my will. Thank you very much.
That's a wonderful way to say it. I have this belief that if things go my way, I will be okay. And see, that is the basic flaw that Bill will talk to us about over and over again as we start to go through the 12 and 12. Well, this has been really very, very good discussion.
Well, and Tom mentioned a key word too, and that was freedom. That's an integral word in the definition of emotional sobriety. Of course, physical sobriety, freedom from addiction, but in emotional sobriety, freedom from, I'm going to say it, unmanageability.
That's right.
We are free to manage our lives if we're emotionally sober.
That's right. That's right. We talk about that the goal here, and a great way of describing emotional sobriety, is acting for ourselves without being selfish. Acting for self without being selfish. Acting for others without losing ourselves. You see, that's the balance that Bill was talking about, that we can achieve when we do achieve a sense of emotional sobriety. And once again, sometimes you'll approximate that. Don't think you're going to hit the bullseye all the time on that one. But if you strive for it, there's an incredible value in keeping that as your intention. And what did you call it, Herb? Intentional consciousness, right? It's an intention that we want to set, and we won't always achieve it. But if you set it as your intention, it will make a big difference in your life. There's no question.
In the phrase I'll use to capture those two balanced concepts that you just said poetically, quite frankly, and that is we take care of ourselves while in balance of helping others take care of themselves.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's an awareness of self and others.
Yeah.
Yeah, awareness of self. It's using ourself in a way that honors our integrity, and it honors, when I say that, it honors both the I inside of us, the part of me that wants to be my own person, but it also honors the we inside of me that wants connection and togetherness. And you're going to see that part of emotional sobriety is the achievement of that as well.